Sometimes destiny knocks so softly that only the kindest heart ever hears it. Abigail Carter had long ago stopped believing that remarkable things happened to ordinary Omega girls like her. At 23, she spent every sunrise sweeping the wooden floors of Briar Hollow Inn before the first travelers arrived, carrying steaming kettles of tea from the kitchen to weathered tables polished smooth by generations of wandering merchants, hunters, and pilgrims. The little roadside inn rested at the edge of the northern pine forest, nearly 20 miles from the royal capital, where stories of the Alpha King sounded more like distant legends than real life. Abigail never complained about the endless work. She believed honest hands always found peace, even when they never found recognition. Most guests barely noticed her. Some looked past her entirely, speaking to the innkeeper instead, as though she were invisible. Others whispered about the quiet Omega who had never been chosen, never courted, and never seemed important enough to deserve a different future. Abigail answered every sharp remark with the same gentle smile. Bitterness required more energy than kindness, and kindness was all she could afford to give. One rainy afternoon, just as gray clouds swallowed the last glimpse of sunlight, the front door opened, and a young traveler stepped inside, carrying nothing more than a worn leather satchel. He looked no older than 24, with chestnut brown hair slightly damp from the rain and warm hazel eyes that seemed unusually relaxed despite the long journey behind him. His clothes were simple, well-made but unremarkable, the kind worn by respectable merchants or younger sons of comfortable families. He glanced around the nearly empty dining room before smiling politely. "Is there any room left for one more traveler?" Abigail nodded immediately. "There is always room if you do not mind a small table near the fireplace." "That sounds perfect," he replied. Unlike many visitors, he thanked her before taking his seat. Abigail noticed the difference immediately. When she returned carrying fresh bread and hot stew, the young man stood to help her place the heavy tray on the table. "You should not have carried all of that alone," he said with genuine concern. Abigail laughed softly. "If I waited for someone else to help, the soup would be cold before anyone ate." The traveler smiled. "Then perhaps next time I should help." His easy kindness surprised her more than expensive gifts ever could have. Over the following weeks, the same traveler returned again and again. His name was Ethan Ashford. Sometimes he stayed only long enough for dinner before continuing north. Other times he remained overnight, always requesting the same small room overlooking the pine trees behind the inn. He never demanded special treatment. He never boasted about wealth or influence. Instead, he asked Abigail about the herbs growing beside the kitchen, helped elderly travelers carry luggage upstairs, and spent quiet evenings listening to wandering musicians without interrupting their songs. The entire village began referring to him simply as the friendly younger brother of some distant noble family, because every few weeks an elegant carriage would arrive to collect him. Abigail assumed someone important somewhere cared deeply for him, but she never asked questions that did not belong to her. One chilly evening after closing the dining room, Abigail found Ethan sitting alone on the back porch watching rain collect along the wooden fence. She carried 2 mugs of warm herbal tea outside and offered him one without speaking. Ethan accepted it with a grateful smile. "You always know exactly when someone needs company," he said quietly. Abigail shrugged. "Sometimes people do not need advice. They only need someone willing to sit beside them." Ethan looked toward the dark forest stretching beneath the evening sky. "What if the person sitting beside you is hiding something important?" Abigail considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Everyone carries something they are not ready to share. I would rather wait until they choose to trust me than force them to explain." Ethan lowered his eyes, his smile becoming almost wistful. "I hope you never change." Before Abigail could answer, the distant sound of galloping horses echoed through the valley. Both of them looked toward the narrow road leading to the inn. Moments later, a magnificent black carriage trimmed with silver stopped directly outside the front entrance. 4 royal guards wearing cloaks embroidered with the crest of the Ashford crown stepped down in perfect silence. Every guest inside the inn froze where they stood. The captain opened the carriage door before bowing respectfully toward Ethan. Abigail stared in complete disbelief as the young traveler calmly stood, thanked her for the tea, and quietly walked toward the waiting escort, while every royal guard lowered their heads the moment he passed. Abigail barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image of the royal guards bowing before Ethan with the effortless respect reserved only for someone far more important than an ordinary traveler. Yet when morning sunlight poured through the windows of Briar Hollow Inn, life demanded the same familiar routine. She swept the dining room, prepared fresh biscuits, arranged wildflowers on every table, and greeted travelers with the same gentle smile she had worn every day for years. The only difference was the quiet curiosity lingering in the back of her mind. Who was Ethan Ashford really? 2 days passed before the familiar sound of footsteps entered the inn once again. Abigail looked up from polishing wooden mugs and saw Ethan standing in the doorway, wearing the same simple traveling clothes as always. There was no royal carriage, no silver cloaks, no escort waiting outside. Rain glistened on his shoulders, and his warm smile looked exactly as it always had. "I hope you still have that table by the fireplace," he said lightly. Abigail could not help smiling in return. "It has been waiting for you." Ethan laughed softly before taking his usual seat. Not once did he mention the royal guards. Not once did he explain what Abigail had witnessed. She decided not to ask. If his kindness had never changed, neither would hers. As she served him lunch, Ethan noticed she had placed an extra slice of fresh bread beside his bowl. "You remembered my favorite," he said. Abigail shrugged gently. "You always leave before breakfast. I figured you probably skipped a meal again." Ethan looked down for a moment before quietly saying, "You notice everything." Throughout the afternoon, they spoke as naturally as they always had. Ethan asked about the herb garden behind the kitchen. Abigail showed him the first lavender blooms of the season and explained how different leaves carried different scents depending on the morning dew. He listened with genuine interest, never pretending to know more than he did. While many travelers hurried through conversations, Ethan always made people feel as though their words mattered. That evening, an elderly couple stopped at the inn after their wagon wheel broke several miles away. The husband struggled to carry heavy luggage through the front entrance. Before Abigail could offer assistance, Ethan was already beside him, lifting one of the larger trunks with an easy smile. "Let us get you inside before the rain starts again," he said. The old man thanked him repeatedly without realizing the young traveler helping him was connected to the royal family. Ethan never corrected him. Watching from across the room, Abigail found herself smiling again. Whatever secret Ethan carried, it had never made him believe ordinary people were beneath him. That alone told her more about his character than any title ever could. Later that evening, after the guests had retired upstairs, Ethan remained seated beside the quiet fireplace while orange flames danced across the stone walls. Abigail brought 2 cups of hot apple cider before sitting across from him. Outside, gentle rain tapped softly against the windows. Ethan stared into the fire for several silent moments before speaking. "Do you ever wonder whether people would treat you differently if they knew everything about you?" Abigail considered the question carefully. "Maybe," she answered. "But I would rather be known for how I treat people than for where I came from." Ethan slowly looked up at her, and something thoughtful settled behind his hazel eyes. "Even if where someone comes from changes everything?" Abigail smiled gently. "Not everything. It cannot change whether someone is honest, or patient, or kind." Ethan gave a quiet laugh that sounded almost relieved. "You make difficult questions seem simple." Abigail shook her head. "I think people usually make simple things difficult." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The crackling fire filled the comfortable silence between them. Then movement outside the front window caught Abigail's attention. She noticed 2 riders on dark horses stopping across the road beneath the shelter of tall pine trees. They wore plain traveling cloaks, but their posture was too disciplined to belong to ordinary merchants. One briefly looked toward the inn before giving a nearly invisible nod. Ethan noticed them as well, though he never turned his head completely. Instead, he quietly sipped his cider. "Friends of yours?" Abigail asked with innocent curiosity. Ethan smiled without looking away from the fire. "People who worry more than they should." Abigail accepted the answer without pressing further. What she did not know was that the 2 riders were Royal Scouts assigned to observe every stop Ethan made during his journey. Hidden beneath their ordinary cloaks rested the silver crest of House Ashford. Neither scout paid attention to the travelers entering or leaving the inn. Their attention remained fixed entirely upon one thing. They watched every conversation between Ethan and the quiet Omega who still believed She was simply sharing warm cider with the younger brother of an important family, completely unaware that every kind word she spoke was slowly shaping the future of an entire kingdom. Far beyond the northern forests, where towering mountains guarded the royal capital, Ethan Ashford rode through the open gates of Ashford Keep beneath banners that carried the silver crest of the kingdom. The moment his horse entered the courtyard, every royal guard standing watch lowered a respectful hand across his chest. Castle servants paused their work. Senior advisors bowed as he passed. Yet Ethan acknowledged each greeting with the same quiet smile he offered travelers at the roadside inn, never allowing ceremony to change the warmth in his voice. He crossed the great hall without stopping until enormous carved doors opened before him. At the far end of the royal chamber, Alpha King Nathaniel Ashford stood beside a wide stone window overlooking the endless pine forest stretching toward the horizon. His silver hair reflected the afternoon sunlight, while his calm gray eyes remained fixed on the distant mountains. Without turning around, he spoke softly. "You stayed longer this time." Ethan smiled faintly. "I found someone worth staying a little longer for." Nathaniel finally faced his younger brother, searching his expression with patient curiosity rather than impatience. "Tell me about her." Ethan walked toward the long oak table standing between them before answering. "She never asked why royal guards bowed to me. She never asked whether I owned land or titles. She remembered how I liked my bread, noticed when I skipped meals, and treated every stranger as though they deserved kindness before they earned it." Nathaniel listened in complete silence. Ethan continued, "People see what they hope to gain. She only sees what someone needs." A thoughtful smile appeared across the Alpha King's face. "And does she know who you truly are?" Ethan gently shook his head. "She believes I am simply the younger brother of an important family." Nathaniel looked toward the window once more. "Good." Ethan understood that single word carried years of disappointment behind it. Noble families had arranged countless introductions hoping their daughters would become the future Luna. Lavish banquets had filled the palace with elegant gowns, practiced smiles, and carefully chosen compliments. Yet every meeting left Nathaniel feeling more alone than before. Too many people admired the crown before noticing the man wearing it. That was why Ethan had volunteered months earlier. He wanted to meet people who expected nothing from him. If someone treated the younger brother with genuine kindness, while believing he possessed no real influence, perhaps that same heart would remain true before a king. "She never tried to impress me," Ethan said quietly. "She simply made room for one more traveler at her table." Nathaniel lowered his eyes for a moment, absorbing every word. "What is her name?" "Abigail Carter." The name settled into the quiet chamber with surprising weight. Nathaniel repeated it almost to himself, as though committing it to memory before ever meeting its owner. At that moment, the heavy doors opened once again, and the Moon Oracle entered with graceful, measured steps. Her flowing midnight blue robes brushed softly across the polished stone floor, while moonstone beads shimmered gently around her neck. Ethan bowed respectfully. Nathaniel greeted her with familiar warmth. Evelyn Ashcroft smiled knowingly before either brother could speak. "The forest has already whispered her name." Ethan blinked in surprise. "You know about Abigail?" The oracle nodded. "Kindness leaves a trail, even the wind remembers." She approached the great window and gazed toward the distant forests. "The kingdom has searched for the future Luna among noble houses, yet the moon has always looked where no one else thought to search." Nathaniel folded his hands behind his back. "Do you believe Ethan has truly found her?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "I believe he found the woman who never changed her heart because someone important walked through her door." Silence settled comfortably among the three of them. Outside, sunlight slowly drifted across the castle courtyard while white birds circled high above the towers. Ethan finally spoke again. "She still believes I am only someone's younger brother." Nathaniel smiled gently. "Then let her continue believing that for a little while longer." Ethan looked puzzled. "Why?" The Alpha King answered with quiet certainty. "Because trust that grows before truth is revealed becomes stronger after truth is known." Later that evening, nearly 20 miles away, Abigail finished closing the shutters of Briar Hollow Inn before stepping outside into the cool evening air. The stars slowly appeared above the pine trees while lantern light glowed warmly through the windows behind her. She wondered briefly whether Ethan had reached home safely. A gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar across the quiet valley, and for reasons she could not explain, she smiled toward the distant northern mountains, completely unaware that inside the royal castle her name had just been spoken by the Alpha King himself for the very first time. Several peaceful weeks passed before Ethan returned to Briar Hollow and once again, arriving just as the first golden leaves of early autumn drifted across the village road. Abigail was trimming fresh rosemary outside the kitchen when she noticed him walking toward the porch carrying the same worn leather satchel that always seemed far too ordinary for someone whose arrival occasionally summoned royal guards. She greeted him with the warm smile that had become effortless whenever he appeared. "You have been away longer this time," she said. Ethan looked toward the little herb garden she had expanded beside the inn and smiled. "I was beginning to think the flowers might miss me more than you would." Abigail laughed softly. "The flowers do not drink all my apple cider." Ethan placed one hand over his heart with playful gratitude. "Then I am relieved my place has not been taken." Their easy conversation continued as naturally as if no time had passed between visits. Throughout the afternoon, Ethan helped repair a loose fence behind the stable, carried flour sacks into the kitchen without being asked, and listened patiently while Abigail explained which herbs should be harvested before the first frost arrived. To everyone watching, they looked less like strangers and more like lifelong friends whose conversations never required effort. Later that evening, after the last travelers had retired upstairs, Ethan reached into his satchel and carefully removed an elegant cream-colored envelope sealed with dark silver wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. He placed it gently on the wooden table between them. Abigail looked at it with surprise. "What is this?" Ethan smiled. "An invitation." She carefully broke the seal and unfolded the thick parchment. Her eyes widened as she read the beautifully written words inviting her to attend the annual harvest banquet hosted by Ethan's family at their northern estate. The letter spoke warmly of honored guests, music, shared meals, and gratitude for friendships formed throughout the year. Abigail looked up in disbelief. "Your family invited me?" Ethan nodded. "My brother insisted our home should always welcome the people who matter most." Abigail lowered her eyes toward the invitation again. "I have never attended anything like this." Ethan rested his hands comfortably on the table. "Then perhaps it is time you did." She hesitated. "Your family sounds important. I would not know how to behave around nobles." Ethan's expression remained reassuringly calm. "Just be yourself. That has always been more than enough." Abigail smiled faintly, although uncertainty lingered behind her eyes. "I do not even own a proper dress." "You own kindness," Ethan answered gently. "Everything else is much easier to borrow." His words stayed with her long after he retired for the evening. During the following days, nearly the entire village became excited after hearing about the invitation. Mrs. Evelyn Harper happily altered one of her late daughter's elegant dresses so it would fit Abigail perfectly. The village tailor carefully repaired tiny embroidered flowers along the sleeves. Even the baker insisted she accept sweet pastries for the journey. Their generosity left Abigail deeply moved. She had always believed she lived quietly on the edges of other people's stories. Yet somehow the entire village celebrated as though one of their own daughters had received an extraordinary opportunity. Meanwhile, inside Ashford Keep, preparations for the harvest banquet transformed every corner of the royal castle. Crystal chandeliers were polished until they reflected hundreds of tiny lights. Long banquet tables filled the great hall beneath towering, stained glass windows. Noble families from every region of the kingdom confirmed their attendance, each believing the celebration might finally reveal the future Luna. Nathaniel Ashford quietly observed the preparations from the upper balcony, while Ethan joined him overlooking the bustling hall below. "She accepted," Ethan said with quiet satisfaction. Nathaniel smiled almost imperceptibly. "Was she nervous?" Ethan laughed softly. "Terrified." Nathaniel nodded knowingly. "That means she still believes she is simply visiting your family." Ethan leaned against the stone railing. "Do you intend to tell her before the banquet begins?" The Alpha King slowly shook his head. "No." Ethan studied his brother carefully. "You are asking her to walk into the greatest surprise of her life." Nathaniel's silver eyes drifted toward the enormous entrance doors where countless guests would soon arrive. "I am asking her to arrive exactly as she has always been. If she enters believing only friendship brought her there, then every smile she offers will still belong entirely to herself. Far away at Briar Hollow Inn, Abigail carefully folded the invitation once more before placing it inside a small wooden box beside her grandmother's silver pendant. She looked out through the window toward the northern mountains glowing beneath the setting sun and quietly wondered what kind of family could raise someone as thoughtful as Ethan. She never imagined that with every mile bringing her closer to their home, she was also walking toward the moment that would change her life forever. The journey to the northern estate began beneath a clear autumn sky, painted with soft shades of gold and pale blue. Abigail sat inside a comfortable carriage beside Ethan as endless pine forests rolled past the windows, their branches glowing beneath the afternoon sunlight. The farther they traveled from Briar Hollow Inn, the more impressive the surrounding landscape became. Stone bridges crossed crystal streams. Vineyards stretched across gentle hillsides. Small villages proudly displayed silver banners fluttering in the cool breeze. Abigail quietly admired everything while smoothing the simple cream-colored dress Mrs. Evelyn Harper had lovingly altered for the occasion. She still could not believe she had accepted an invitation from Ethan's family. Every mile made her wonder whether she truly belonged among people whose lives seemed so different from her own. Ethan noticed her thoughtful silence and smiled reassuringly. "You have been staring out the window for nearly an hour." Abigail laughed softly. "I have never traveled this far before." Ethan looked toward the distant mountains. "Sometimes leaving familiar places helps us discover where we were always meant to be." She smiled politely, assuming he was speaking only about the beautiful countryside surrounding them. By late afternoon, the carriage climbed the final hill overlooking Ashford Keep. Abigail's breath caught the moment the castle appeared beyond the towering gates. Massive stone walls rose above perfectly tended gardens, elegant fountains shimmered beneath the setting sun, and countless banners bearing an intricate silver wolf crest moved gently in the mountain wind. The estate was far grander than anything she had ever imagined. "Your family lives here?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded with calm simplicity. "They do." Before the carriage came to a complete stop, several attendants hurried forward to open the doors. Abigail expected them to greet everyone equally, yet she noticed something unusual. Every servant smiled warmly toward Ethan before respectfully lowering their heads. He greeted each person by name, asking about their families and thanking them for their hard work. None of his kindness appeared rehearsed. It felt completely natural, as though every conversation mattered to him regardless of rank. Abigail found herself smiling again. Whatever position Ethan's family held, they had clearly taught him humility before privilege. Inside the grand entrance hall, polished marble floors reflected warm chandelier light, while musicians quietly performed gentle melodies from the upper balcony. Guests dressed in elegant gowns and tailored formal suits filled the spacious corridors with laughter and conversation. Abigail suddenly became very aware of her modest dress despite the careful alterations made by the village seamstress. It was beautiful by her standards, yet surrounded by embroidered silks and sparkling jewelry. It seemed wonderfully simple. Ethan noticed her hesitation. "You look exactly as you should," he said quietly. Abigail looked at him uncertainly. "Everyone else seems to belong here." Ethan answered with a gentle smile. "So do you." As they entered the magnificent ballroom, curious eyes gradually turned toward the unfamiliar young woman walking beside Ethan Ashford. Whispered conversations drifted through the room like autumn leaves carried by a breeze. One elegantly dressed noblewoman quietly asked her companion, "Who is she?" Another replied, "Perhaps a merchant's daughter." A third studied Abigail from across the room before softly saying, "She certainly is not from one of the great houses." Abigail pretended not to hear the comments. Years of serving travelers at the inn had taught her that quiet confidence often spoke louder than wounded pride. She simply admired the enormous crystal chandeliers suspended above the dance floor, the towering windows overlooking moonlit gardens, and the long banquet tables decorated with autumn flowers and polished silver. Every detail reflected care rather than extravagance alone. While Ethan stepped away briefly to greet several older guests, Abigail wandered toward one of the tall windows overlooking the royal gardens. She watched lanterns illuminate winding stone pathways below, while soft music echoed behind her. A young noblewoman approached with a courteous smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Good evening," she said pleasantly. "I do not believe we have met." Abigail returned the greeting warmly. "My name is Abigail Carter." The woman tilted her head with polite curiosity. "And which noble family are you representing?" Abigail answered honestly. "I am not representing anyone. I work at a small roadside inn." The noblewoman's smile faltered almost imperceptibly before she recovered her graceful composure. "How unexpected!" Two nearby guests quietly exchanged surprised glances before continuing their whispered conversation. Abigail felt a familiar ache inside her chest, but refused to let embarrassment overshadow Ethan's kindness in inviting her. She simply thanked the woman for welcoming her and turned back toward the gardens. Across the ballroom, Ethan watched the exchange without intervening. His expression remained calm because he recognized something important. Abigail had not become defensive. She had not exaggerated her background or hidden who she truly was. She answered every question with quiet honesty, exactly as she always had. High above the ballroom, hidden behind an ornate balcony overlooking the celebration, Alpha King Nathaniel Ashford observed the evening in complete silence. It was the first time he had ever seen Abigail Carter with his own eyes. She stood alone among nobles who measured worth by titles and ancestry, yet there was not a trace of bitterness in her face. She simply continued treating everyone with the same gentle dignity she had shown his younger brother from the very beginning. Nathaniel's silver eyes lingered thoughtfully upon the quiet Omega while the first ceremonial trumpet sounded through the great hall, announcing that the evening's most important guest was about to arrive. The final note of the ceremonial trumpet echoed through the magnificent ballroom, and every conversation faded into complete silence. Noble families turned toward the grand entrance as towering oak doors slowly opened beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. One by one, the royal guards standing along the marble aisle lowered their heads in perfect unison. Castle servants stopped moving. Musicians gently placed their instruments at rest. Abigail looked around with growing uncertainty, sensing that everyone understood a tradition she had never witnessed before. Ethan quietly stepped away from her side without explanation. Before she could ask where he was going, he walked several paces toward the entrance and respectfully lowered one knee. Abigail stared in complete confusion. She had never seen Ethan bow before anyone. Then the entire ballroom followed. Hundreds of guests gracefully lowered their heads together until only Abigail remained standing in the center of the great hall. Embarrassed, she glanced from one face to another, unsure whether she had misunderstood the custom or simply reacted too slowly. Gentle footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor. Calm, measured, and unhurried, they carried the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce his importance because every person present already knew it. Abigail slowly lifted her eyes. A tall man dressed in an elegant black royal coat embroidered with silver thread walked through the open doors beneath the glowing chandeliers. His silver hair reflected the warm candlelight, and his composed gray eyes held neither pride nor coldness, only a quiet strength shaped by years of responsibility. The silver wolf crest upon his formal cloak matched every banner decorating the castle. Abigail immediately understood what no one had needed to say. This was Alpha King Nathaniel Ashford. Her heart raced. She quickly lowered her head in respect, quietly whispering, "Your Majesty." Nathaniel paused only a few feet away. Instead of continuing toward the royal throne prepared at the far end of the ballroom, he looked directly at Abigail. Around them, the entire hall remained silent. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, a gentle smile appearing as though everything unfolding had happened exactly as he had hoped. Nathaniel spoke with a calm warmth that reached every corner of the chamber. "Please raise your head, Miss Carter." Abigail hesitated before looking up. She expected to see distant royal formality. Instead, she found patient kindness. Nathaniel's expression held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. He studied her quietly for a brief moment before asking a question no one in the ballroom expected. "My brother tells me you offered him friendship long before you knew anything about our family." Abigail blinked, surprised by the simplicity of the question. "He was always kind to everyone," she answered honestly. It seemed natural to return that kindness. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "Even after you saw royal guards bow before him?" She nodded without hesitation. "A title can explain where someone comes from. It cannot explain who they choose to become." A gentle murmur drifted through the gathered nobles before fading once more into respectful silence. Nathaniel's silver eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Did you never wonder whether he belonged to the royal family? Abigail smiled faintly. I wondered, but I believe the answer belonged to him. If someone wishes to share their story, they should never feel forced to tell it. Ethan quietly lowered his eyes, deeply moved by her words. Nathaniel looked toward his younger brother before returning his attention to Abigail. Do you know why Ethan traveled throughout the kingdom so often? Abigail slowly shook her head. I thought he simply enjoyed meeting new people. Nathaniel smiled gently. He does. The ballroom relaxed with quiet laughter. Then the Alpha King continued. But I also entrusted him with something no council could accomplish. Every noble leaned forward with renewed attention. Nathaniel's voice remained calm. I asked him to live without announcing who he was, to meet people who expected nothing from him, to discover whether genuine kindness still existed beyond the reach of crowns and titles. Abigail's eyes widened. She slowly turned toward Ethan, who offered her an apologetic yet hopeful smile. I never meant to deceive you, he said softly. I only wanted you to know me before you knew my family. Abigail looked back toward Nathaniel, still trying to understand everything she had just heard. Then, every visit to the inn, Nathaniel nodded, was never about judging you. He took one unhurried step closer. It was about discovering whether the heart my brother trusted would remain unchanged even when surrounded by power. Abigail lowered her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by emotions she could barely name. She had believed she was serving warm meals to a thoughtful traveler. She had never imagined that every conversation, every cup of tea, every small act of kindness had quietly become part of a story much larger than herself. As she looked up once more, she noticed Nathaniel smiling with quiet certainty, not because he had finally found someone impressed by royalty, but because he had finally met someone who never needed royalty to choose kindness in the first place. The great hall remained wrapped in complete silence long after Alpha King Nathaniel finished speaking. Hundreds of guests stood motionless beneath the glowing chandeliers, as though no one wished to become the first person to interrupt a moment that already felt destined. Abigail struggled to steady her breathing. She had spent her entire life believing kindness was something ordinary people offered because it was the right thing to do. Never had she imagined that those simple choices would one day be remembered inside the royal palace. Nathaniel watched her with quiet patience, allowing her time to gather her thoughts. Unlike many rulers who expected immediate answers, he seemed to understand that some truths needed room to settle. Abigail finally looked toward Ethan, her expression filled not with anger, but with gentle confusion. Why did you never tell me? She asked softly. Ethan stepped closer, his warm hazel eyes reflecting sincere regret. Because I wanted at least one place where people smiled before hearing my family name. At the inn, I was simply Ethan. You laughed with me, shared meals with me, reminded me to rest when I looked tired, and never expected anything in return. I was afraid that if I revealed everything too soon, every conversation afterward would feel different. Abigail listened quietly before lowering her eyes for a brief moment. Then she smiled with the same kindness that had welcomed him on the very first rainy afternoon. I suppose I understand that better now. Ethan released a small breath he had not realized he had been holding, and relief softened his face. Nathaniel observed the exchange without speaking. It confirmed everything his younger brother had told him during those long conversations inside Ashford Keep. The warmth Abigail offered had never depended upon status. It came naturally, without calculation or expectation. Before anyone else could speak, the Moon Oracle entered the ballroom with graceful, measured steps. Her midnight blue robes shimmered beneath the crystal lights while quiet respect followed her through the gathered nobles. Every member of the royal council lowered their heads as she approached the Alpha King. She smiled first at Ethan, then at Abigail. There are moments, she said gently, when the moon does not ask whether someone was born into greatness. It asks whether greatness already lives quietly within them. Several nobles exchanged thoughtful glances, but none dared interrupt. The oracle turned toward the assembly. For many years this kingdom searched among noble houses, believing honor could be inherited. Yet honor reveals itself most clearly when no reward is expected. Her calm voice carried effortlessly through the hall. This young woman offered friendship before knowing influence. She protected dignity before discovering titles. That cannot be taught through privilege alone. Abigail felt every eye in the room turn toward her once again. Only now the whispers sounded different. Curiosity had replaced dismissal. Thoughtfulness had replaced quiet judgment. Nathaniel stepped down from the raised platform where the royal throne stood waiting behind him. Instead of returning to the seat prepared for the king, he walked slowly across the polished marble floor until he stood only a few feet from Abigail. "There is one final thing you deserve to know," he said. Abigail met his steady gaze. Nathaniel continued. "Months ago, members of the royal council urged me to meet daughters from the greatest houses in the kingdom. Every introduction was carefully arranged. Every conversation was perfectly rehearsed. Yet none of those meetings answered the question that mattered most." Abigail asked quietly, "What question?" Nathaniel smiled with quiet honesty. Who would still choose kindness if there were no crown to impress? Silence settled once again. Ethan looked toward his older brother with unmistakable admiration. He knew how rarely Nathaniel spoke so openly before the court. The Alpha King continued, "My brother never searched for someone worthy because of wealth or reputation. He searched for someone whose heart remained unchanged whether standing inside a roadside inn or a royal palace." Abigail looked around the magnificent ballroom filled with polished marble, golden chandeliers, elegant gowns, and centuries of tradition. Then she thought about the little herb garden behind Briar Hollow Inn, the worn wooden tables she polished every morning, and the countless travelers whose names she would never know. Somehow those two worlds no longer felt impossibly far apart. They had been quietly connected all along through one simple decision repeated every day: to treat every person with dignity before knowing who they were. Nathaniel's silver eyes reflected quiet certainty as he looked at her. "My brother completed the task I entrusted to him long ago." Ethan smiled warmly. "I found exactly who I hoped I would." The words lingered gently through the great hall, while soft music quietly resumed from the upper balcony. Abigail realized that nothing about her had changed. She was still the same Omega who believed warm meals, patient listening, and simple kindness mattered. Yet somehow those ordinary choices had become the reason an entire kingdom was now listening to her story. And for the first time in many years, Ashford Keep no longer felt like a castle searching for its future. It felt like a home preparing to welcome it. The quiet music drifting through the grand ballroom seemed to soften the weight of the evening. Yet beneath the elegant melodies another emotion quietly stirred among the gathered nobles. Not everyone welcomed what had just unfolded. While many guests reflected thoughtfully upon the Alpha King's words, others struggled to accept that an unknown Omega from a roadside inn now stood at the center of the royal court's attention. Lady Victoria Holloway, daughter of one of the kingdom's oldest noble families, stepped gracefully forward with perfect composure. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers as she bowed respectfully toward Nathaniel before speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Your Majesty, no one questions Miss Carter's kindness. It is plainly visible. But surely the future of an entire kingdom must also consider tradition." The ballroom grew silent once more. Abigail lowered her eyes, never wishing to become the reason for conflict. Nathaniel remained completely composed. "Continue," he invited gently. Lady Victoria folded her hands before her. "For generations, every Luna has come from families prepared to guide the royal household. They understand diplomacy, governance, and the expectations of the crown. Miss Carter has lived a life far removed from these responsibilities." Several members of the royal council exchanged uncertain glances. None interrupted. Nathaniel listened until she finished before answering quietly. "Do you believe wisdom can only be inherited?" Lady Victoria hesitated. "No, Your Majesty, but experience matters." Nathaniel nodded. "It does." He slowly descended the final marble step, separating the raised platform from the ballroom floor. Every eye followed him as he crossed the polished stone without hurry. Instead of stopping before the council or returning to the throne, he walked directly toward Abigail. She looked at him with quiet uncertainty, unsure what would happen next. Nathaniel stopped beside her, leaving no distance between the king and the woman everyone had spent the evening discussing. His calm gray eyes swept gently across the gathered nobles before returning to Abigail. "When my brother first visited Briar Hollow Inn," he said, "Miss Carter did not know he belonged to this family. She welcomed him anyway. When she saw tired travelers, she offered warm meals before asking for payment. When elderly guests needed help, she gave her time without expecting recognition. None of those choices were made before an audience. He paused briefly before continuing. Character revealed in private remains character in public. Abigail felt emotion quietly rise within her chest. She had never imagined the ordinary days of her life could matter to anyone beyond the small village she called home. Nathaniel gently extended one hand toward her. For a heartbeat, she simply looked at it, uncertain whether she truly understood what the gesture meant. His expression remained patient, offering no pressure, only trust. Abigail slowly placed her hand in his. The great hall fell completely still. Nathaniel did not raise her hand like a public trophy. He simply held it with quiet respect before turning once more toward the assembled court. This kingdom has spent years searching for someone worthy of standing beside its king, he said. Tonight I choose to stand beside the woman whose kindness never depended upon my crown. A soft murmur spread across the ballroom before fading into thoughtful silence. Ethan watched from only a few steps away, his smile filled with unmistakable pride. The moon oracle quietly closed her eyes for a moment as though listening to an ancient promise finally fulfilled. Lady Victoria lowered her gaze, reflecting carefully upon everything she had heard. After several long seconds, she stepped forward once more. Abigail instinctively prepared herself for another objection. Instead, Lady Victoria offered a respectful bow toward her. "Miss Carter," she said sincerely, "perhaps I measured preparation too narrowly. A kingdom can teach ceremony. It is much harder to teach compassion." Abigail looked genuinely surprised. "Thank you," she answered softly. One by one, other nobles followed. Some offered quiet bows. Others simply placed a hand across their hearts in respectful acknowledgement. Captain Andrew Mercer of the Royal Guard stepped forward first among the officers before lowering his head. Soon every silver-cloaked guard standing along the marble walls mirrored the same gesture. No command had been given. None was necessary. Nathaniel looked toward Abigail with a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "There will be much to learn if you choose this path," he said quietly enough that only she could hear. Abigail smiled back with calm honesty. "Then I will learn one day at a time." Nathaniel nodded. That is exactly how every good leader begins. Warm applause gradually filled the ballroom, not loud or triumphant, but heartfelt. The music rose once again as lantern light shimmered across polished marble and stained glass. For the first time that evening, Abigail no longer felt like a visitor standing inside someone else's story. Standing beside the Alpha King with Ethan smiling nearby, she realized she had never been chosen because she was extraordinary in the eyes of the world. She had been chosen because she never stopped treating ordinary people as though they mattered, and that quiet truth had become the strongest foundation upon which an entire kingdom could build its future. The morning after the harvest banquet arrived with gentle sunlight spilling across the stone courtyards of Ashford Keep, painting the ancient castle in warm shades of gold instead of solemn gray. Abigail stood quietly on a balcony overlooking the royal gardens where autumn flowers swayed beneath a cool mountain breeze. Everything around her still felt like a beautiful dream. Only a few days earlier she had been serving warm bread and herbal tea inside a small roadside inn. Now she found herself welcomed into a place she had once believed existed only in stories. Yet despite the grandeur surrounding her, she remained the same woman who believed every stranger deserved kindness before judgment. Soft footsteps approached from behind. Ethan stepped onto the balcony carrying 3 steaming cups of herbal tea balanced carefully on a polished wooden tray. He smiled the moment he saw Abigail admiring the gardens. "I thought castles could always use better tea," he joked. Abigail laughed warmly before accepting one of the cups. "You still remember the recipe?" Ethan nodded proudly. "I learned from the best teacher I have ever had." Moments later, Nathaniel joined them wearing a simple dark coat instead of formal royal attire. Without the ceremonial cloak and jeweled insignia, he appeared less like a distant ruler and more like an older brother grateful to spend a quiet morning with the 2 people he trusted most. He accepted the final cup before looking across the peaceful gardens below. "I realized something last night," he said softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow with playful curiosity. "Only one thing." Nathaniel smiled. "For years I believed the kingdom needed a perfect Luna. I was searching for someone who could strengthen the crown. Instead, the crown needed someone who could strengthen the people around it. Abigail lowered her eyes modestly. I am still learning. Nathaniel looked at her with calm certainty. So am I. The three of them walked together through the gardens where castle workers, apprentices, and servants greeted them naturally rather than with anxious formality. Abigail stopped more than once to admire unfamiliar flowers while asking the royal gardeners about local medicinal plants. Before long, she was kneeling beside one of the older gardeners discussing herbs capable of easing sleepless nights. Nathaniel watched the conversation quietly. She had not entered the gardens searching for admiration. She had entered searching for ways to help. Nothing about her kindness had changed simply because the scenery had become more magnificent. During the following weeks, small changes spread naturally throughout Ashford Keep. Abigail organized a healing garden where castle servants and nearby villagers could freely gather fresh herbs whenever they needed them. The royal kitchens began preparing simple meals for travelers passing through the capital during difficult weather. Ethan spent more time visiting villages alongside Abigail than attending lavish celebrations, discovering that helping others together brought far greater joy than endless ceremonies. Nathaniel noticed the difference everywhere he looked. Laughter echoed more often through the castle corridors. Servants spoke with greater confidence. Even members of the royal council gradually sought Abigail's quiet advice because they had come to trust the honesty behind every answer she offered. One peaceful evening, as the first winter stars appeared above the mountains, Nathaniel invited Abigail and Ethan to dine in a private family room hidden away from the formal banquet halls. The long wooden table held only 3 place settings. Fresh bread, warm soup, roasted vegetables, and herbal tea filled the room with familiar comfort rather than royal extravagance. Abigail smiled as she recognized several recipes she had once prepared back at Briar Hollow Inn. Nathaniel noticed her expression. I asked the royal cooks to learn from your favorites, he admitted. Ethan laughed softly. Now it finally smells like home. They shared stories late into the evening. Ethan recalled his first rainy afternoon at the inn. Abigail laughed about how suspicious she had become after watching royal guards bow to someone she believed was only a thoughtful traveler. Nathaniel quietly admitted that every report Ethan brought back had made him hope a little more than the one before. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King did not feel surrounded by expectations. He felt surrounded by family. As the fire burned gently inside the stone fireplace, the Moon Oracle paused outside the open doorway for only a brief moment. She watched the 3 of them laughing together around the simple wooden table before smiling quietly to herself. No prophecy had ever promised jewels, ceremonies, or grand declarations. It had promised something much rarer. A family built upon kindness freely given before titles were ever known. She continued down the hallway without disturbing them, knowing the future she had waited so many years to witness had finally arrived. Long after the castle settled into peaceful silence, Abigail stood once more beneath the stars beside Nathaniel, while Ethan joined them overlooking the sleeping kingdom below. None of them needed many words. The mountain breeze carried only quiet contentment across the ancient stone walls. Abigail realized that destiny had never changed who she was. It had simply carried her kindness farther than she had ever imagined possible. Nathaniel looked toward the countless lights glowing across his kingdom before gently taking Abigail's hand once again. This time there was no audience, no ceremony, and no expectation. Only 3 hearts finally standing where they had always belonged, proving that the strongest kingdoms are not built by crowns alone, but by ordinary acts of compassion shared one day at a time.